Before I went up to the shed yesterday evening, part of the plan today was to strip the flywheel grinder and see what parts we need. So I took the time last night to give it a wash, pressure cleaned it all down, and yeah, descaled a few bits and pieces. Still quite a bit of work to do, but now it shouldn't be half as bad to work on. The rotary table's going to come off. So yeah, now we've got a nice tidy piece of machinery to play with. Today sometime we'll probably hop into that and start stripping it down and just seeing what parts we need to go and buy for it. Well, I've started stripping the rotary table out of the clutch and flywheel grinder, and there's a few things we found with it so far. The top plug here was okay, but this bottom plug, at some time it had the top knocked off it. I don't know how long it had been like that. The bearing on the end of the motor here, it's a brushless motor, 3-phase motor. The bearing feels good here, but when you dig around inside there, there's well, a bit of muck. We have holes here which are obviously breathers, and they have a little slot. As the rotary table, the rotary table does 16 revolutions per minute, and any oil that mists up or comes up through, there's a tiny little slot there, and it will try and generate it out to the back and away. So the motor's not looking too bad. The end plate's not all rusted. Being a brushless motor, there shouldn't be any springs in that we have to worry about. But I'll keep going, strip it down, and I'll let you know what I find as I see stuff. We've just got the worm gear out. It just took a little bit of shock treatment just coming out, and it's supported at both ends with ball bearing. Both the bearings are good, and it's had a neoprene type seal trying to keep the water out. The worm gear looks very good. There's a bit of end movement on there. I believe it shouldn't have that. It may be as simple as just tightening up this nut. We'll go through that when we replace all the bearings. There's some pretty wild looking stuff coming out of the bottom of that gearbox. So I'm still unsure how to pull this main worm out and do all the bearings for that. There's grub screws up here, so we might have a look in there and just see if there's little screws to hold the bearing in or something like that. Well, look at that. That's how the ring gear, how the main table, it all comes out. It actually just sits in the housing with this grub screw, and that just holds it in there. In the bottom there's nothing, as in supporting this worm drive. The worm drive looks in really good order. And yeah, there's just nothing there. So it just sits in there, gets located with the screw. So to put it back in, we'll have to have a good look and work out the best procedure to put him back in place. And I reckon that there might need a little bit of a clean out. Ah, good gear. Alright, I'll go and try and wash all that out and see if we have some bearings and yeah, see what we can do with it. With this worm drive box, getting this piece here going, that's one of the major parts for the flywheel grinder. The worm drive gearbox rotating the flywheel at 16 revs per minute under the spinning cupstone is what surfaces your flywheel. So at the other end there, it's not hard to buy a 3-phase, 415 volt 3-phase motor to put in the other end if it needs it. and the motor's seized solid, so I imagine it's going to need it. And this here was the part that had me a little bit worried, because if this bit needed extensive work because of the flood with corrosion, just general wear and tear or something like that, this would have been the very expensive end to do up. So I think we can get out of this with just a few bearings and a reseal and a tidy up, and yeah, I'll go and do that, then we'll have a look and just see the best way to move forward from here. Well, we've got the whole housing cleaned up for the worm drive. It's outside in the sun. The field windings, they look unmarked. We've cleaned them all out and they're just in the sun drying out. We'll put a bit of brake cleaner or something on them. Yeah, just to help evaporate any other moisture there, but there's no hurry. We'll leave it out in the sun today. It's around 25, 26 degrees in Bundaberg today, and it's a lovely winter's day. So yeah, we'll just let the sun dry it all out there for a while. But in the meantime, we can work on this shaft here. I think I would have some bearings in my box of tricks. This seal I don't believe I would have, but on the end of the armature shaft here, there's a inner race for a Torrington bearing. Now in the gearbox housing up the end where the motor is, you have a main armature support bearing, but then at the end there's a needle bearing, a Torrington needle bearing, and that supports this far end of the shaft when you have the worm drive and all in. So to get this nut off, we have to pull that off. Wasn't that an easy kill? When I was hooking the puller up onto that, I thought, oh boy, I hope this little puller's strong enough. And now this bloke here, I think they might be getting a little bit of Loctite on the reassembly. Yeah, it needs a bit of a bath, but that's all good. Very little movement in there. So it looks like 20 by 40 by 7. Comac is an Italian company, so metric, no worries at all. That seal's in lovely condition, look at that. Nice and soft. I suppose it's only very slow moving, so that's alright. And that bloke sits there, and I imagine he's like an oil slinger. If something gets through, it'll try and keep it slung out. I have to get my knockometer. Alright, I've got a tiny little 6-ton super cheap press. We might take that over and just pop these bearings off. I'll see if there's any markings on them first. It's not legible, at least. We'll set them up in a little press and get them off and have a look what they are. Right, we've got it in a little 6-ton press. It's only a little 6-ton super cheap press, and this is all we have for the moment. When we get the big one done, we should have a bit of bit more pushing power. This is quite handy though. One gone. A little bit of board here, we just put that there to protect the thread. There we go. And look at this, Lance forgot to take the keyway out. Forgot to take the key out. It was one of those game to do that thing. Alright, we'll go and see if we have some bearings to suit these. I'll pull that key out instead of just talking about doing it. And yeah, we'll measure a few things up and see how we go. This morning I'm back onto the gearbox, or the actual rotary worm drive on the flywheel grinder, and we've got new bearings where we just had tin seals before. We're going to replace them now with the sealed bearings, and we've got a new seal for inside, so we'll just poke along and put it together and yeah, just get it all sealed up. We can't run it at the moment until we get the rest of the machine reconditioned and all tidied up and restored correctly. But for the moment, we can put all our little worm drives back together and Loctite it all up and have one part of the job finished at least. We just put the new seal down in the end of the motor, and that's tool number 32mm socket, we're going to call that. It's got a nice flat surface for bumping the seal in. Fits nicely down into the ball. Nice and gentle. There's a little lip for that to sit against. And there she blows. Right down inside there. Yeah, you can just see that. And that stops the oil that's in the gear drive from coming up into where this shaft sits and the worm drive goes onto it. Now, by taking away the tin shielded bearings, these bearings are just shielded, they're not sealed, and by putting in a sealed bearing, we're giving it a second line of defence to stop any oil coming into the motor, and oil around the field windings and all that here, it won't do them any good. So I'll go and press these bearings on and I'll be back in a minute. The bearings are on at both ends, we've pressed them on. I've fitted the key into the keyway. Now this goes up through the middle here nice and gently. Try and guide him through. Okay. Now there's a small needle race that goes up in the other end. We'll grease him and poke him into there, so when we bring the shaft up in, the shaft will be pressed into that small bearing. Pull this fella out and that'll give me a better run up in there. I can just check that it's going in visually. Make sure it's all straight. And now and then there's a little needle bearing can drop down on jobs like this. Yeah, look, that looks great. As I bring this shaft in, I also need to feed the worm drive and the nylon locking nut on as we go. So you can just feel that located on the worm drive. And the nut is on as well. That wasn't quite on the plan. That's turning nice and free. We have to go about 10 millimetres more. That's where the worm goes, and you can see in here it needs to come this way a little bit more before we can tighten the lock nut. As we try and move the worm back, it keeps wanting to push out the back end here. So what we'll do is just put the back plate on loose. Put a couple of bolts in there and that'll give us something to push against when we try and lever the gear back. Well, I've put this plate on the end here loosely. There's a little bit of spring tension here because there's a wavy washer in behind the end bearing here. But that now should let us bring this gear back a little bit. Just like that, haven't marked anything, that's good. We can start doing the nylon lock nut up. When we started pulling this apart, you could actually rock the main wheel back and forth. And what had happened is this nut on the end of the worm had come loose. So we'll make sure that's nice and tight this time and Loctite it in. And that should take a bit of jarring out of the table. So I'll just get this little fella started and I'll be back in a second. I'm actually having trouble lining that nut up, so I can get it to turn so far, but not all the way, so I'll take these screws out again now. I don't need to lever anymore, as the worm gear's right up on the shoulder on the shaft. Take a bit of tension off the bolts. I'm going to go and get a little bit of key steel and lock in under that nut so I can turn the shaft. I just can't get a good grip on it. Right, a few different sizes of key steel. We'll put one down in there. We'll put the fattest one in there. Try and grab the little groove on the nut. I think that will go well. Alright, this is a go. Screwdriver on the end. There's a couple of cooling fins, but we'll just have to go very steady. And right at the end here, we'll just put a bit of Loctite on, where it can come down in between the nut and the worm, so the Loctite holds it all on. A couple of drops of thread lock. Just let it run around the nut a little bit. That's winding on nicely. Beautiful. We'll call that tight. Okay, we've put a bit of seal around here. Strawberry jam it is. Looks like strawberry jam. Loctite 515. I don't know if it tastes like strawberry jam. Feel free to leave me a note if you've tried it. As with everything, get all the bolts started before you tighten it. Gives you a little bit of chance for movement and alignment of the bearing properly, and gives all the holes a chance to line up. If you grab one first and just tighten one up, well, the chances of the others lining up aren't that good, and that's how you strip bolts if you try and put them in crooked. This Loctite 515, it takes up to about 25 thou irregularities in surface, and 25 thou is a lot. It's about the thickness of a hacksaw blade. But you still need to have good surfaces and clean surfaces, but any excess that gets squashed out of the joint like this, if it's inside a gearbox or something like that, that will just dissipate. It'll get diluted with any oil and it'll just disappear. Where when you use the silicon-based products, you get that little bead inside, and over the years, I've fixed many hydraulic systems with silicon products in the hydraulic relief valves, stuck under a valve, stuck in a little plunger or something like that. So when I run my own workshop, I very rarely used a silicon-based product. We use quite a lot of 515 and other Loctite products, but not the silicon. This is R51, and it's a Bearco knockoff that Alan Bear has made from Bearco, and it won't jam up your hydraulics or anything like that. So it's a better product to use. So in my workshop, I used to use 515. I wouldn't allow silicon in certain things, and I wouldn't allow thread tape around anything. That thread tape's just rubbish. Might be all right for sealing a tap or under your kitchen sink, but keep it away from your tractors. It's just no good. The strange little thing about this worm is the only thing that really supports it is this little screw, Allen head screw, coming in the side here, which is just a bit of a strange setup. Nothing runs on the bottom. There's no plug coming up the bottom to support it in the middle or anything like that. It just sits a snug fit in the housing and has this screw to maintain the height. And it turns this way, and it has a little spiral machined into it, so as it turns, any oil that would want to come up, the spiral helps it drop back down again. So it's a bit of an odd one. I've actually had to undo this cap again and turn the worm to get it to engage with the drive, with the other mount. So as it turns, it sort of pulls itself in a little bit. So it's a little bit of a fiddle, really. To get this wheel sitting in there, I actually had to pull this cap off once more and turn the worm to feed it in. Once we got the worm at the correct depth, or the wheel at the correct depth, we could turn the armature with the worm on the end of it, and that actually let it feed in for us. So I've had to pull this back plate off, clean it all up once more, reseal it again, and that should be right to go. It turns nice and freely up in the worm, or in the gear, the ring gear. So that's going up home nicely. There's no pressure on these bolts at all. So we know that the bearing's sitting right up where it would like to sit, right in the recess. There's a tiny little bit of spring tension from that wavy washer. Clean up a little bit. Now the bolt on the side that adjusts the depth of the wheel is this fella here. So we just need to grab an Allen key. We'll just nip that up. It actually bottoms out here. It doesn't bottom out. It bottoms out on a shoulder in a recess here, and it doesn't bottom out in the groove. So that allows it to turn freely. And it's such a tight fit in there when you actually push the ring gear in. That's what holds it true, which is I sort of would have supported it underneath with something. But anyway, this is how they've chosen to do it. And we've had this machine for many years, and it's been a beauty. So they've got it right. Now before we used to have a bit of backlash back and forth in this. There's just a little bit there still. You need backlash, but the amount we had before was excessive. That's a lot better. Yeah, with a little bit of backlash there, you can it gives the gears a little bit of clearance, so that's a good thing. Now we'll tip him over. I'll tidy this up, and it has a plastic plug there. That's fine, but a couple of these were broken. I don't know how they got broken, but they were broken, so we'll put a new one in here, and the two side ones, we might just make them out of a little bolt or something like that. That's all we're going to do on this for the moment. We've got it all buttoned up, and that was the main goal of doing it today. I'd had parts sitting on my bench here for a little while, and I just don't like having them out where they can get bumped off the bench or that. So this part is done. I still have to find a couple of plugs for here. I might even see if I can find a sight glass for this top one, or we'll just use a bolt if we have to do that. But for the moment, this part's done, and that was the main worry with the whole job. So we've got a lot of threads to clean up. I've got the head off on the other side of the main head that comes down the top, that lowers the cupstone down. So anyway, for the moment, that's a wrap. We'll just put this aside and wrap him up, put him aside, seal him up, and go on with something else on the machine. And when we get to the stage where it can all go back together, well, yeah, we'll be all right to roll. I'll catch you later, eh?